Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. My name is Salma. Welcome back to this channel. Here we talk about raising Muslim kids, building healthy Muslim families, and all things related to that. I'm a mom of 6 children. Some of them are grown, some of them are still growing up. My youngest is almost 9, and my oldest is 23. Alhamdulillah. Today I wanted to have a bit of a chit-chatty video where I answer some of the questions. There are actually only 2 questions that came up on the channel, and those questions have come up repeatedly in my private conversation with sisters as well, so I wanted to address them today, inshallah. First question is from one of the sisters that asked on the channel. She said, how to make the children feel connected to the Deen? How do we teach them Islam? She said, every time we sit down to read Quran or teach them Islam, they feel bored and they start a fight. So that's the first question. How do we make them more connected to the Deen? And my answer is going to be a bit maybe unconventional, and that's why you're here probably. I don't believe in so much as teaching them the Deen rather than just living the Deen as a family, right? And so that would mean just exposure, like I have said in the previous videos, just living your life. So if you are a Muslimah that's at home, you're praying your salahs, naturally your children will follow you around. Naturally your children will see you making wudu. The children will start copying your movements, So these are all things that happen naturally, right? And then as the conversation goes, you can tell them, okay, I'm about to pray Dhuhr, Mama's going to pray Asr, we are praying here. So a lot of it just happens naturally through living your life, right? So I'm a big advocate of just living your life as closely as possible with Islamic principles. And all of us have different starting points. All of us have different issues, that are preventing us from being maybe the best version of ourselves. But as long as we're working ourselves, that's going to create that environment, inshallah, where our kids are going to learn naturally about Islam. So when you're in Ramadan, you're fasting, you're telling your kids about it. Your kids are noticing we're having iftar, okay, oh, we're making suhoor, all these kind of things. So think of it as child learning how to walk. You don't really have lessons on teaching them how to walk, right? None of us wake up at 9 a.m. and say, okay, first walking lesson of the day, right? How does a child learn how to walk? They learn how to walk naturally, as long as we are not putting any obstacles in their ways, right? As long as we're not tying them up to something and making them sit down. Every child will learn how to walk naturally. Now, some of the children will have maybe some difficulties, and this is, where we then seek expert help. But generally, children will learn how to walk on their own just by regular life, right? Same thing with speaking a language, right? You don't have speaking lessons. Most people don't, right? And so your child picks up the language just by conversing with you, just by listening to conversations. And, if we needed lessons for that, humankind would have died out a long time ago, right? And so a lot of the learning happens naturally, right? And so when we try to separate the Deen, when we have to sit down and make it a separate lesson, kids can sense that. They can sense that this is boring. They can sense that this is not really part of our lives. They can sense that this is difficult. They can sense that this is really not a natural transition, right? So if you're, for example, reading Quran, there's no way your kids are not going to be part of that, right? Especially if they're young. And so if you're reading out loud, if you're reciting out loud, your kids will naturally want to mimic you. If you're praying and, if you're reciting out loud, your children will follow the movements. They will sometimes, young children will learn the surahs just by listening, without even knowing. Now, I'm a big advocate of learning how to read properly, but generally, if they're exposed to it, that would be the best thing. Or if you are going out somewhere and you get into the car and you say the dua, or if you're leaving the house and you say the dua, kids will learn by copying you, by you being the role model, right? And so, as I mentioned in the previous videos, a lot goes into creating the environment you want, right? And so, if you remove the haram elements from your home, if you remove alcohol, if you remove TV, if you remove, music, if you remove free mixing, if you remove all these things from your home, children will naturally adapt Islamic principles in their lives, and those will be a given. This will be the upbringing, so they will not feel the resistance, right? So if you learn the Quran, if you as a family listen to Islamic lectures, if you have a habit of going to the masjid, if you have a habit of hosting good Muslim friends, the conversations will naturally go in that direction. You will naturally discuss things. And if you and your spouse sit down and discuss, what's happening in the world, and you drop some hadith in it and some Quranic ayahs, your kids will naturally pick up on that, right? So I'm not a fan of scheduling Islamic learning as a task or a chore or something to be done, because again, it's very difficult to make it the kids will sense that. Same like, if you said, even if you took the most natural thing, as you said, like as a speaking lesson or walking lesson, kids would resist that. Like all of us would resist that, right? And so I think that's that natural resistance that happens in all of us when it doesn't make sense. Why is this happening? Why are we learning this right now, right? And so instead of looking for techniques how to make it more fun or how to make it more engaging, I think the engagement happens when we live our lives authentically, right? Like when we are just, if I'm wearing hijab, my daughters will naturally gravitate. When we go shopping, when we buy clothing that's according to Islamic principles, we can have a conversation. A lot of it's just part of your natural daily life, right? And so I don't like making things preachy, right? I don't like that every Islamic book we buy for our kids, sometimes when you look at the Islamic publishers, everything has to have some Quranic hadith or, ayah, like it feels like we're shoving it down the kids' throats. But it's much more authentic if the story is just unfolding and the characters are Muslim, right? And so it feels natural because, if it's just some I think we all feel that natural resistance if somebody's trying to preach at us, right? And I think we can sense that even as adults, right? Like, if somebody's trying to give us Islamic nasiha and, correct us and all these kind of things, this is where the resistance comes in. Kids feel like we're picking on them. Kids feel like, we are pointing out their flaws and things like that. But if it happens naturally, if we're all praying together, if we are buying prayer outfits for everybody, if we are reciting Quran together, right, that goes a long way in teaching the kids Islam, right? And so I would drop the idea of teaching them per se, scheduling a lesson 3 times a week, but rather looking how to build in, how to live your life authentically, how, what is your schedule like, what is your daily routine? And I mentioned this in the previous videos, how can you engineer your environment? So do you have a mushaf next to your bed? Do you have a Quran in the living room? Kids will naturally pick it up and wonder, right? Are you playing music in your car, or is it nasheed or Quranic stuff? My kids have been listening to nasheed in the car for ages, and they've memorized, so much, even nasheed in my language. That got them to be proficient in my language. That got them to be proficient in English, to learn some Islamic principles, right? Like it happens naturally, right? Same things with reading. A lot of people ask, how do you get the kids to read? Well, you have to expose them to books, right? Like you have to be a reader yourself. You cannot just like say, okay, I mean, it can work, but it's just much, much harder. And kids can feel like you're trying to enlighten them somehow. And all of us feel that natural resistance, when somebody is trying to fix us, right? And so I think a lot of it, just kind of think about it. How can you Islamify your morning, for example, right? I'm using Islamify here under quotes. So how can you make your environment flow more natural? How can that be part of and don't put on an act, just be yourself, right? Like don't be in the morning now waking up and all of a sudden being like a robot, because kids can also sense that. But you can also say, if you have older kids, now younger kids won't notice it, but if you have older kids, you can kind of say to them, hey, look, Mama and Baba had a conversation. We're really trying to be better versions of ourselves. We're trying to pray, we're trying to set our priorities different. This is how the new rule is going to be, and this is how we're going to spend our time. And then you got to stick to it, right? But it's more about your daily flow rather than setting, specific lessons for your children. So I hope this helps, inshallah. The second question that came up in the group, in one of the comments, was a sister asking about her child doing hifdh, and she said she wanted an honest answer from me. Did I think that the child needed to be extra brilliant in order to do hifdh? Or could anyone with strong willpower do it, right? So was it just natural talent, natural brilliance, or was it just about willpower and just kind of pushing through? I think it's neither, or actually a bit of both. I think number one, it's dua. I think, it's Allah's mercy that allows us to memorize and to be from Ahlul Quran, right? And as we can see with the most recent happenings, just because of somebody who has memorized Quran doesn't mean they're necessarily a good person, right? Like we have to cleanse our hearts, and there's that hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that, if we're just reciting Quran for fame, or if we're just doing all these things, so people could see us, those would be the first people that will go to Jahannam, right? So I think it's our dua, it's our sincerity that comes first, right? Like, why are we trying to do this? Why are we trying to memorize the Quran? And so I think when we open up that door, like, when we sincerely rely on Allah, when we ask ourselves, okay, why are we doing this? Then I think anyone will be able to do it, right? And it's not about strong will as much as it's about the environment, as much as about its consistency, right? And there will be bad days, and there will be, I don't think it's just, a matter of powering through hardship, but it's also a matter of just like thinking of Quran as a a lifelong companion, right? And so it's not so much about, a deadline. I want my kid to be a hafidh, but I want my children to have Quran as their guidance in their lives. Like, I want them to drink from the spring. I want to drink them directly from the source. It's very hard to raise a practicing Muslim nowadays. And this was a consideration, when I embarked upon this journey, when I thought, how would I would like to raise my kids? In my thinking, in my journaling, it kept coming up. I wanted them to drink straight from the spring. I wanted them to drink straight from the source of Islam. I didn't want anybody to be able to manipulate them into the religious weird opinions and these kind of things. I wanted them to know their religion, and what better source for that than the Quran, right? And so what is your goal with the memorization of the Quran? Why do you want your kids to do hifz? Is it just, so they can say they completed it and they're hafiz? Is it that crown on the day of judgment that you want? And that's perfectly fine, right? But in a more practical sense, why do you want them to be, a hafiz? Why do you want them to be, somebody who spends their time with the Quran? I grew up in a society as a child in a non-Muslim, non-practicing society, where children were encouraged to participate, in activities, to pick something they were good at, or to pick something that they would be working on. So be it sports, or be it music, or be it some, extracurricular hobby. And one thing that my brother said a long time ago that stuck with me was that basically kids that were encouraged to spend their time with something wholesome had less trouble as teenagers, right? Or had less trouble growing up because they were focusing their time with something good. So those guys that were doing sports, for example, they were more likely to stay out of trouble and be, troublesome teenagers because they had their practice, they had their discipline, they had their routine, they had something to spend their time with, right? And so when I thought about those kind of principles that I grew up as a child, again in a non-Muslim practice, in a non-practicing environment, I thought I wanted my children to spend their time with the Quran, because that's the best time. That's the best, my daughter just said the other day, she's like, subhanAllah, the rewards of, spending the Quran are so big and the khair is so good. It's like, I'm surprised more people are not doing it, right? So if you think about, how big the rewards are spending your time with the Quran, just the reading of the Quran, but just, contemplating on the words, just, spending the time with Allah's words. That's how I want to occupy my time. That's how I want to occupy my day. I want to spend as much time as I can in this world being grounded, having Quran as my guide. And that's going to come through spending time with the book, right? And so one of the ways I thought to go about it would be hifdh, would be memorization, because all the hours that my children spend with the Quran are hours that are not being spent on something else, right? Like it redirects the focus, And so when you spend time with the Quran, it kind of keeps you away from other bad things, right? And so that's why I don't think it's necessarily just brilliance. I think any regular person can do it. But I think it comes with the dua, number one, and it comes with sincere intention, and it comes with the environment, and it comes with effort, and it comes with this understanding that this is a lifelong journey. Like nothing happens the day that you complete the Quran. Like nothing happens, because you still have to do murajia the next day. You have to do revision. You will forget it. The hadith says that the Quran will escape, right? Like, if you faster than a camel, like you will forget it if you don't maintain it, right? So it's a question about spending a lot of your waking hours with the book of Allah, right? And so I think anyone can do it. It's not just brilliance. It's not just, strong willpower, but rather I think a lot of it's just engineering our environment to be such that we are spending time with practicing people, that we stay away from the haram, that we're kind of in this environment where Quran being our companion is the biggest priority, right? So kind of like with the first question, if we live a life that's based on the Quran, if, again, we just don't memorize it because, if we just memorize it in Arabic and we have no clue what's going on, part of that comes, okay, young children might not understand everything, but part of that learning, or, becoming a hafidh is also understanding the Quran, understanding what it tells us, being an encouragement for us. When your children start quoting the ayat back to you, when they start, talking about the tafsir, that's the real blessing, right? And being able to recall the Quran and being able to recite it at will, like, just in times of difficulty, in times of goodness. I remember one time we were going to do some paperwork and we were running from one office to another. It was quite stressful. And my son was just kind of, pacing behind me and just, revising his Quran. And subhanallah, I was getting all agitated because I was in the moment, and I was just like, okay, I'm stressed about the paperwork and what are they going to say, and at the checkout, at the counter, these kind of things. And then I looked at him, and he was just happy revising, just reciting. And then I thought to myself, well, I could be reciting this something too right now, just to calm myself down and just to ground myself. So I think the key to successful hifdh, it's not just brilliance or just strong will, but it's just a lot of time spent with the Book of Allah. Just a lot of time. And in order to be able to spend a lot of time, we need to create such environments and such family culture where everybody's spending time with the Quran, where the parents are living such lives, where it's not a segregated thing where we just send the kid to madrasa and then we are totally turned off from that, right? But like, we have to model that kind of lifestyle. We have to talk about the Deen in our daily conversation. We have to live that lifestyle, and then the children will follow, inshallah. All right, I hope that helps, inshallah, and I'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.